So welcome back, and today we're going to be talking about ST-Links like this, the dongle style, and how to add a USB-C jack to a ST-Link like this. And in a previous video I made a ST-Link, then I was able to use the Mini B USB, but that's not used as commonly now, and most people are switching over to USB-C. I wasn't able to put the Mini USB into this case, so I had to 3D print this case. But I don't really like having to 3D print cases because the lettering's not on there, so it just becomes problematic. So in this video, we're going to talk about going to USB-C, what you actually have to connect up, because USB-C has a ton of connections, and it's quite complicated. At least it can feel complicated. So we're going to talk a little bit about the USB-C connector. This is what the original ST-Link looked like, and I have multiple of these. And like I said, it's a dongle style because it's like a flash drive. It just plugs right in. It's got USB-A on it. And that's kind of frustrating sometimes because when you want to plug this in, it's nice if you can use just a standard cord right to the USB connector. So hopefully this helps you, and we'll start talking about the USB-C connector, and then we'll show how we actually added that to this thing. So I have the USB-C receptacle here, and it's like what they call from Wikipedia the back view. So this image is right from Wikipedia, and the reason why this connector can go either way or reverse is if you were to spin this connector around. A12 here, which is a ground, would get spun all the way around and trade places with B12. So that's pretty simple. So your grounds haven't changed. Let's look at D+. So D+ here is A6. If you were to spin this all the way around, this D+ is going to end up over here. And the D- is going to spin all the way around and end up here. So you can see pretty quickly that basically it's just duplicate. There's no magic to this. It's just duplicates of everything, which does make things complicated. So this is the receptacle. So this would be, when I say receptacle, this is actual like connector that goes on the device, phone, whatever. And you have both D+ and D-. Now, if you imagine if the cable had multiple D+ and D-, like this one does, a D+, D-, D+, D-, D-, the D+ and D- would be tied together. Now, D+ and D- is really legacy USB, like 2.0. And that's all we're going to be using for the ST-Link. And legacy 2.0, you can look it up, but I think it's into the 400 megabits per second. So plenty fast for almost anything, honestly. Now that we know how this is reversible, if you look at the cable side, so this is the cable side. And you notice the cable doesn't have, and this is the back view as well. Now the D+ and D- look like they're reversed, but that's just because you're looking at the back of the connector, and as well as the other one is the back of the connector. The front goes into the connector. So anyway, D+ and D-. There's no D+ and D- on B6 and B7, as you can see here. And that's because if you had D+ and D- on both, and the other one had D+ D- on both, you'd have two D+ and two D- all tied to the same thing. And you don't want that. So the cable actually leaves out one of the D+ and D-. But then the device has both, and if those are all tied together, then you would easily be able to reverse it. Now on my project, I left out D+ and D- on my board. And so if I have a cable that also leaves out D+ and D- on one of these, what I found is that if I plug in the connector one way, it would work. And if I plug the connector in the other way, it wouldn't work. So we'll go through that. But, it still works. It's just that if it doesn't work right away, you know that I need to plug in the opposite way. I should have tied it together on the board side, since the cable never is going to have D+ and D- tied together. So that's the USB-C. Now, there's a bunch of other stuff here. Ground, and you see V-bus. V-bus is your power, so B4 and A9. So that's your power, and so that's not magical. And it should put out power, like a USB-C connector should put out 5 volts on the V-bus no matter what. To get V-bus to put out anything else, like 15, 20, 12 volts, anything like that, you need to do power delivery, and that then involves the CC lines. And we're not going to get into that because that's beyond the scope of this ST-Link project, but it would be fun to get into more of that. This is so if you're just using a USB-C as a legacy, as I'm calling it, which is basically 2.0, which any of your old connectors like USB-A or USB Mini. Now USB-A can also support 3.0, so that gets complicated. But if you're doing 2.0, all you really need is D+, D-, and V-bus, so your power and your ground. And there you go. You're just using the connector like you would any other USB connector. So there you have it. Now we're going to move to the next step, which is the next step is we're going to lay this board out. So in order to lay this board out, basically I have the USB-A jack that all it is just the pads I'm using to connect to the ST-Links pads. So it's a little, making a little daughter board, and this little daughter board is going to have a USB-C jack on it, and then also USB-A pads. USB-A pads are going to line up with the pads on the ST-Link, and that's how we're going to solder them together. And then from the ST-Link to the USB-A pads on the little board, we'll go to the USB-C jack. So you can see there, I'm just going to quick tie up everything that I did not add D+2 and D-2. So I didn't add those, so I added everything up, and then I tied everything together with my traces. The pins are very small, so it's very hard to get everything tied in together. And then once I finish the daughter board, the next step is just fabricating it and getting it in, and then let's make sure it's the right size. But I have a little problem right away. So I have got the package in the mail, and I was like looking at it right away. That's fine. That side's fine. Somehow I put solder mask over every one of the pads. So I don't know. I'm going to try to scrape it off with my X-Acto knife. And if we can do that, we'll keep going with this. Otherwise, it stops here. So as you can see, even in the 3D model from KiCad, the pads are covered over in the green solder mask. And obviously, the color solder mask is whatever you order when you're ordering the boards. But unfortunately, I should have been paying attention, I guess, more to that. So now I'm scraping away the solder mask with my X-Acto knife, pen knife. And if you just use a sharp pen knife or box cutter or something, that's probably the easiest way. And you just kind of try to cut through the solder mask and then scrape it. It usually comes out pretty nice. So if you ever have traces or pads in the future that you meant to be able to connect to, or there's a trace and there's no pad, but you still want to connect something, you can always just scrape away the solder mask, and usually with a little flux, either whether it's flux from the solder paste or you actually hand solder, you can always solder to traces as long as the solder mask is scraped away. So keep that in mind if you ever run into this issue. But you can see I've got it almost cleaned off, and then we're gonna solder it. So this one here, I was able to successfully solder it. I had to basically scrape off the stuff like you saw. So now that we're done pasting, I also used a broken cable that I cut the end off on, checked the pinout, and it's the green and white. So assuming that everything else goes well, we'll soon have this on. So I pulled the extrusion case off, and now what I want to do is heat it up and add some solder to this, and then heat quickly, and then it'll come off. Because if you see, they didn't actually solder the actual body, like the case, connector body, on there. So it'll be much easier, because since these aren't soldered, all I gotta do is heat these pads up. So normally I'd be mad that they didn't follow through with their work, but since it makes it easier for me, got that off. And I didn't even create any solder bridges or anything. So the next thing to do is just clean up these pads. So I'm just using solder wick, which is basically braided copper fabric. The copper absorbs a lot of the solder, and so all you have to do is heat up the copper, and the copper then heats up the solder, and it all kind of just melts into the solder wick. And then you just take it away, and it's basically just, like it's exactly like its name, solder wick. It works pretty well. It's cleaned up my pads very well. They look great. Pretty much all the solder's off of it, and now I can put paste on there. That's cleaned up. And so basically these pads here on J1 have to line up with those pads there. So I'll just put some solder paste on there and set it on like that, and then put it in the oven, the refill oven, and then this will get hot and everything else will get hot, but it'll all cool back down to where it was before. And then this extrusion here, case or whatever you want to call it, but I call it extrusion, that will be able to put on there. We'll have to take off the cap cover thing. Right, so this is what it looked like when it was done and it came out of the oven. I don't know how strong the joints are, because obviously you're just relying on those surface mount pads to hold the USB-C in there. So that's it, guys. So you saw how it looked like when it was all finished at the beginning, and so we're done. All you gotta do is put it back in the case, and now you don't have to always have different kinds of cords. All right, thanks for watching.